Hey everyone, ready for a deep dive into something kind of mind-bending?
Ooh, I like where this is going. Lay it on me.
So, today we're tackling the unexpected power of crises, how those crazy shakeups can actually spark positive change.
I am intrigued already.
We've got some seriously juicy excerpts to unpack from The Power of Habit, Charles Duhigg's book, and another gem, An Evolutionary Theory of Economic Change. Both are chock full of stories about how chaos can lead to awesome breakthroughs.
Sounds right up our alley. Those moments where everything gets flipped on its head, but somehow good things emerge. I'm ready to dive in.
Me too. And our first stop is Rhode Island Hospital back in the early 2000s.
Okay, setting the scene.
It was a top-tier medical institution, a leader in its field.
Mm.
But behind the scenes, there was this constant tension brewing between the nurses and doctors.
The classic power struggle. We see this all the time, right? Even when everyone's supposed to be on the same team, working towards the same goal, you get this competition for power and resources.
Exactly. And it was more than just competition. Nurses were calling it the glass factory because everything felt so fragile, like it could just shatter at any moment.
Yeah.
They even had this, get this, a secret color coding system for the doctors' names on those whiteboards.
Whoa, really? A secret code? What was it, like red for danger?
Even worse, black. Black meant don't even think about questioning them.
Yikes. Talk about an unspoken power dynamic. It's like everyone tiptoeing around a landmine, just hoping it won't explode.
And guess what? It did.
Oh no, what happened?
There's this tragic case involving an 86-year-old patient. He was admitted with a subdural hematoma, which means bleeding in the brain, needed emergency surgery.
High stakes, that's when those ingrained habits, those seemingly small things, can have major consequences.
Absolutely. So they wheeled him into the OR, and the nurse notices something's off. The consent form, it doesn't say which side of the head the hematoma's on.
Oh wow, that's a crucial detail.
Right. She suggests double-checking the brain scans just to be safe. But the surgeon, feeling the pressure of time, he just overrules her, scribbles right on the form, and they go ahead.
Because of that power imbalance, that fear of speaking up, a potentially life-saving question was never asked. It's heartbreaking.
It really is. So they operate on the wrong side of the head. They eventually corrected the mistake, but precious time was lost.
And I'm guessing this wasn't an isolated incident.
Sadly, no.
Yeah.
More wrong site surgeries followed, and Rhode Island Hospital was suddenly under this intense media scrutiny. Their reputation was, well, plummeting.
A full-blown crisis. But like we were saying earlier, sometimes that's what it takes to hit the reset button.
That's where Dr. Mary Wright Cooper comes in. She was the chief quality officer, and instead of just trying to, ride out the storm and protect the hospital's image, she saw this public shaming as a chance for a total overhaul.
Smart move. She recognized the opportunity within the crisis. That's something we see again and again with effective leaders.
Right. She knew a crisis can shake people out of their comfort zones, make them open to solutions that were previously unthinkable.
It's like suddenly everyone's willing to try anything to fix the problem.
So Dr. Cooper went all in. They halted all elective surgeries for a whole day to conduct intensive staff training. They installed cameras in the operating rooms to make sure protocols were being followed. And most importantly, they empowered the nurses to speak up.
Even to challenge senior surgeons. That's huge.
Absolutely. It was about creating a culture of safety where everyone's voice mattered, not just maintaining the existing power hierarchy.
A healthy dose of constructive conflict, you could say.
And the results speak for themselves. No more wrong site surgeries. The nursing staff started winning all these awards for their work, and the whole atmosphere of the hospital shifted. Teamwork, open communication, a real sense of shared purpose.
A pretty incredible turnaround, right? It took a public shaming and a lot of courage, but they turned it around. But I can't help but wonder, does it always have to take a huge public crisis to get people to make these kinds of changes?
That's a great question. We'll definitely come back to that idea, but for now, let's shift gears and journey to a completely different setting. The London Underground in 1987. Picture it. King's Cross Station, one of the busiest in all of London, packed with people during the evening rush hour.
Okay, new scene, new crisis. What went down?
Well, this one really highlights how even systems that seem perfectly balanced on the surface can fail spectacularly if they don't prioritize the right things.
Let me guess. Safety wasn't at the top of the list.
Not even close. It all started with something seemingly insignificant. A passenger noticed a burning tissue at the bottom of an escalator. Just one little tissue.
But we all know those small things can snowball into massive problems. What happened next?
Well, someone spotted the burning tissue and put it out. but they didn't investigate further. Fire safety wasn't their job.
There's that siloed thinking again. Another example of how those seemingly small things can have major consequences.
Exactly.
Hmm.
And it gets worse. Later, another passenger noticed smoke, even saw flames licking up the side of the escalator. A policeman saw the fire too, but because of those ingrained habits, no one took decisive action.
They were probably thinking, not my department. Unbelievable.
Yeah, they had this unspoken rule at the London Underground. Don't contact the fire department unless it's absolutely, positively necessary. They didn't want to cause a panic.
Ironically, that delay probably contributed to the panic later. So how long did it take for someone to finally call the fire brigade?
Almost 30 minutes. 30 agonizing minutes.
Then I bet those 30 minutes made all the difference.
You bet they did. In those 30 minutes, that fire, fueled by layers of old paint and a constant flow of oxygen from the arriving trains, it just exploded.
Oh no, I can't even imagine.
It was chaos. Passengers were trapped on a train as the fire spread, screaming for the doors to open. One guy later described feeling the heat through the wall of the tunnel, watching the ceiling sizzle and melt.
And the policeman who saw the fire earlier.
He got caught in a fireball. His hands were literally melting.
That's just horrific. It's easy to get caught up in the systemic breakdowns, but these were real people whose lives were changed forever because of those failures.
Absolutely. In the end, 31 people died and dozens more were injured.
I can only imagine the public outcry after something like that.
Oh, there was. People were outraged. And rightfully so. They wanted answers, and they wanted someone held accountable.
And that's where Desmond Fennell enters the picture.
You got it. He was the investigator tasked with getting to the bottom of what went wrong, and he quickly realized that the Underground's leadership, they knew about the fire safety issues for years. Years.
Classic bureaucratic inertia. They knew there was a problem, but they just couldn't overcome all that red tape and infighting to actually fix it.
Exactly. And Fennell knew that just presenting his findings in some dry report, it wouldn't be enough. He had to shake things up.
And how'd he do that?
Well, he deliberately turned his entire inquiry into a media spectacle.
A bold move.
It was. He was publicly challenging the competence of those in charge, putting their actions, rather their inaction, in the spotlight for everyone to see.
So he was intentionally amplifying the sense of crisis, using the media to apply pressure and force change.
Exactly. And you know what? It worked. The Underground's leadership was replaced, tons of new safety regulations were passed, and the entire culture was overhauled.
Wow. So even though the crisis itself was a tragedy, it ultimately led to a much safer system. It makes you think about the power of these wake-up calls, even when they come at a terrible cost.
It really does. And now, every single station on the London Underground has a manager specifically responsible for passenger safety. And every employee, from the ticket clerks to the engineers, is empowered to speak up if they see a potential risk.
And the trains still run on time, right?
You bet. They managed to achieve both efficiency and safety, but it took a horrific crisis to get them there.
It makes you wonder, are there ways to learn those lessons without having to go through the fire, so to speak?
That's what we're going to explore in the next part of our deep dive. It really makes you think, right? Like, are there ways to create that kind of urgency, that openness to change, without having to go through a full-blown disaster?
It's an intriguing question, and one that I think a lot of leaders grapple with. How do you motivate people to adapt and evolve when things seem to be working just fine?
Well, it seems like the leaders who successfully navigate those crises, they're not just reacting, right? They're actually using that chaotic moment to reshape the whole organization.
It's almost like a blacksmith using, heat and pressure to mold metal into something stronger. They see that intense heat of a crisis as a tool, a way to make fundamental changes that might have been impossible during times of stability.
That's a great analogy. But isn't there a risk that this whole crisis mindset could backfire? Like, what if deliberately creating that sense of urgency just makes people panic?
That's where the skill of a leader really comes in. It's about striking that balance, creating that sense of urgency without sowing chaos. It's about controlled disruption, if you will.
Okay, so how do they do that? How do they create that controlled disruption?
One way is by clearly identifying and communicating what Charles Duhigg, in The Power of Habit, calls those keystone habits.
Keystone habits.
Yeah. These are those small changes, specific routines that can have a ripple effect throughout the entire organization.
So kind of like leverage points that can shift to the entire culture.
Exactly. You hit the nail on the head. And going back to our examples, think about it. In the case of Rhode Island Hospital, empowering nurses to speak up, that became a keystone habit.
And at the London Underground, it was all about making passenger safety the top priority. even above those departmental boundaries that were causing so many problems.
Right. And those shifts, they might seem small at first, but they had a huge impact because they tackled the root cause of the crisis, not just the symptoms.
So it's about being proactive, about identifying those keystone habits that can lead to lasting change, rather than just reacting to a crisis when it hits.
Absolutely. It's about anticipating potential problems and taking steps to address them before they become full-blown crises. And remember, that investigation into the King's Crossfire, Desmond Fennell, he knew just presenting his findings, laying out the problems, it wouldn't be enough.
You had to keep that pressure on, right? Keep that sense of urgency front and center
Yeah.
to force some real action.
Precisely. And that's why he chose to make it a media spectacle, publicly challenging the competence of the leaders, putting their failures in the spotlight.
So he was using that public pressure, that scrutiny, to drive change. It's kind of brilliant in a way.
It was a bold strategy, and not without its critics, but there's no denying it was effective. But I do think it raises an interesting question. Are there other ways to create that heat for change without resorting to such a public and potentially, damaging approach?
Yeah, that's a good point. Like, how can we apply these principles to our own lives,
Yeah.
to those personal challenges we all face? Because we all have those moments that feel like personal crises, right?
Absolutely. And think about it. When we go through a personal crisis, it shakes things up, forces us to reevaluate our priorities, our beliefs, maybe even our habits.
It's like being forced to confront something uncomfortable about yourself. Maybe a bad habit you've been putting off dealing with, or a limiting belief that's been holding you back.
And that discomfort, it can actually be a good thing. It creates that potential for growth. Instead of just reacting to the situation, you can try to actively shape your response, Use it as fuel for transformation.
So it's like what Dr. Cooper did at Rhode Island Hospital,
Yeah.
seeing the crisis as an opportunity, not just a problem to be solved.
Exactly. And it ties back to what Nelson and Winter talk about in An Evolutionary Theory of Economic Change. They focus on the importance of organizational routines in shaping success,
Organizational routine.
Yeah. These are those ingrained habits and processes that everyone follows in an organization, often without even realizing it.
It's like we're all operating on autopilot, guided by these invisible forces.
That's a great way to put it. And Nelson and Winter argue that these routines, these habits, they're often more influential than deliberate decision-making when it comes to determining an organization's trajectory.
Wow, that's a powerful thought. So if we want to make significant changes, whether in an organization or in our own lives, it's not enough to just set those big, audacious goals, right?
Right. We've got to examine those daily routines, those habits, and figure out which ones are helping us and which ones are actually holding us back. It's about digging beneath the surface and looking at those underlying patterns that are shaping our lives.
And then finding ways to shift those patterns, to replace those limiting habits with ones that support our goals.
Exactly. And often the best time to make those changes is during or after a period of disruption, when we're naturally more open to trying new things.
It's like shaking up a snow globe and seeing where everything lands.
I love that. It's about seizing those moments of disruption and using them as a springboard for growth. But, we've got to be real here. Not all crises lead to positive outcomes. Some can be incredibly destructive.
So it's not about pretending that crises are always a good thing. It's about recognizing their potential and having the skills, the awareness, to guide that change in a positive direction, just like those leaders we were talking about earlier.
You got it. And these examples, they give us a framework for understanding how crises can reshape us, both individually and collectively, and how we can use those moments of upheaval to our advantage.
So as we wrap up this part of our deep dives, what are the key takeaways you want to leave with our listeners today?
Well, I hope they've seen how crises can shatter those old ways of doing things, create a sense of urgency, and open up these windows of opportunity for change. But it's not enough to just weather the storm. We've got to seize those moments to instill those beneficial habits that address those underlying issues. Remember those Rhode Island nurses?
Yeah, they were finally empowered to speak up, and it likely prevented future tragedies.
Exactly. And remember, crises can happen on a personal level, too. They can be opportunities to confront those weaknesses, reevaluate priorities, and come out the other side stronger and more resilient. It's all about recognizing those keystone habits, those small changes that can make a world of difference.
And those changes often happen more easily during or after some kind of shakeup, when we're more open to new ideas and ways of doing things.
Absolutely. But before we move on, I want to leave you with this thought. We've been focusing on how existing crises can be catalysts for positive change, but what about those times when things are relatively stable?
That's an interesting question. Like, is it possible to cultivate that crisis mindset even when things are going smoothly?
Hmm, that's what we'll explore when we come back. Stay tuned.
Welcome back, everyone. We've been digging into those fascinating cases from the power of habit and an evolutionary theory of economic change, exploring how crises can trigger some seriously positive shifts in organizations and even our personal lives.
And right before the break, we left you hanging with a bit of a brain teaser, didn't we? Can you actually create that crisis mindset when things are pretty much smooth sailing?
It seems a little counterintuitive, right? Like, why rock the boat when everything's going okay?
Well, think about it. What makes those crises so darn effective at driving change? It's that jolt of urgency, that shakeup of our routines, that sudden willingness to question those assumptions we usually cling to.
So maybe if we can intentionally create those conditions, even in a controlled way, we can unlock that potential for growth without waiting for something to blow up in our faces.
Imagine it like physical exercise. You wouldn't expect to get stronger without challenging your body, pushing it beyond its comfort zone.
So it's like giving our minds and our habits a workout too.
Exactly. By intentionally introducing challenges, shaking things up a bit, we create space for learning, adaptation, and ultimately, progress.
Okay, I'm on board with the idea, but how do we actually do this? How do we cultivate a crisis mindset when things are relatively stable?
Well, one powerful approach is to embrace a mindset of continuous learning and experimentation. Be willing to try new things, even if they make you feel a little uncomfortable. Step outside of those comfortable routines, those assumptions you've been carrying around, and open yourself up to the possibility of a better way.
So it's like giving yourself permission to question everything, to explore new possibilities without fear of failure.
You got it. And another crucial piece is to actively seek feedback, especially from people who aren't afraid to be honest with you, people who will push you to grow. Surround yourself with different perspectives, different voices.
It's like having your own personal board of advisors, helping you spot those blind spots and seize opportunities you might miss on your own.
That's a great way to think about it. And don't be afraid to fail along the way. In fact, embrace failure as a valuable learning experience.
Like Edison said, I haven't failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work.
Exactly. It's about turning those setbacks into stepping stones. But keep in mind, cultivating a crisis mindset doesn't mean you have to live in a constant state of anxiety, always waiting for the other shoe to drop. It's about finding that sweet spot between stability and disruption, comfort and challenge. Being intentional about creating those moments of growth on your own terms, pushing yourself outside of your comfort zone to become a better version of yourself.
So for our listener out there, what's one tangible thing they can do today to start cultivating this crisis mindset? What's a good first step?
I'd challenge them to pick one area of their life. Maybe it's their work, their relationships, their health, or just their personal habits where they've gotten a little too comfortable. You know, that area where things are running smoothly, but maybe they've stopped questioning whether there's a better way.
That place where they're coasting on autopilot?
Exactly. Once they've identified that area, I'd encourage them to set a small, achievable goal to introduce a bit of disruption, a little challenge. It could be anything. Trying a new approach to a work project, having an honest conversation they've been putting off, experimenting with a new healthy habit.
The key is to shake things up, disrupt that routine, and open themselves up to the possibility of growth and transformation.
And never underestimate the power of those small changes, those keystone habits. They can create a ripple effect that leads to some pretty incredible outcomes. Remember, crises, even those mini crises we create for ourselves, they can be powerful catalysts for growth.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, we encourage you to embrace the power of that crisis mindset, even when there is no major crisis staring you in the face. Challenge yourself, seek out diverse perspectives, and never stop learning and growing. Who knows what you might discover about yourself and what you're truly capable of achieving.
Well said. It's been a pleasure exploring these ideas with you today.
And to all our listeners out there, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll be back soon with another thought-provoking exploration. Until then, keep those minds curious and those habits evolving.